So before we can really get started on going over the LGBTQ inclusivity, we have to go over some terms. I'm going to be throwing out words and terminology that if we're not on the same page with what they mean, then we're going to be lost. I'm going to give you guys, like, there's a list here: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, cisgender, queer, asexual, pansexual, intersex, non-binary, heteronormative, gendered, homophobia, transphobia, discrimination, two-spirited. There's a list of words that you're probably comfortable or you know some of them, but maybe not what all of them necessarily mean and are. So I'm not giving you a necessarily dictionary definition of everything, because it's not always the clearest way either. I think probably the first three are fairly self-explanatory to most people: lesbian, gay, and bisexual. Transgender. I think it's a bit more knowledgeable now, but be comfortable with the term transgender. So transgendered is somebody who identifies with the gender not associated to their sex at birth. I will talk a little bit later on, but I'll start it now. There's a difference between sex and gender. Sex is your physical body. Gender is sort of the social constructs we put around it. So gender tends to be things we associate with being a man or a woman, whereas sex is, are you male or female? So it's not quite the same. Does anybody know what cisgender is?
You can identify as the sex that you are.
Yeah, cisgender is the opposite of transgender. It's the term for the vast majority of us who would identify as cisgender. We identify with our sex at birth. That term is becoming more and more common in a lot of the sort of literature out there. So it's one that's probably, you see it at first and you're not really sure what it means, but that's all it is. It's just the opposite of transgender. Queer. In the current context of the community, which I'm just going to use as LGBTQ+, there's a lot of letters. One version of this presentation, we called it alphabet soup, because it's a large number of people, and there's a large, like, you could never include everybody. Queer is kind of the catch-all. So anybody who doesn't necessarily feel like a term adequately describes them, they will probably call themselves queer. Or it may be a combination of things. They might be gender queer. So they're not transgendered, but they don't really identify with how a lot of people would typically say a man or a woman should have to, or normally does act or feel. So an example that might be a pretty concrete one would be maybe a teenage girl who would describe herself as a tomboy might describe herself as being genderqueer, where, you know, there are not a lot of other things there, but they don't quite fit the mold of what society says a teenage girl should be. So that's kind of maybe the easiest way to think about it. Asexual is somebody who isn't sexual. They just think first couple seasons of Sheldon on The Big Bang Theory, like, that is asexual. That is like that, and that's what it is. And in asexuals, there can be people who are asexual but are romantic, so they don't want, they don't have a drive to have a sexual relationship with somebody, but they like the romance side of things. They can be aromantic, which is non-romance as well. Pansexual kind of comes out from the idea that if bisexual is somebody who's attracted to both men and women, and we get this idea that there could be maybe more than just two categories. If there's non-binary, there's people that are gendered queer, people that are transitioning, people that are transgendered. Pansexual is somebody who may truly be or could truly be attracted to anybody, regardless of who they are. So it's similar to bisexuality, but it encompasses maybe some of those people that bisexuality would exclude. Intersex, that is a very, that's a medical definition, somebody who's born intersex or born in between the two sexes. It's not, it is a biological sort of term and definition. Non-binary, I alluded to it with pansexuality, but non-binary would be, in the world we like to think of things, our brains work in black and white. Hot and cold, sweet and sour, that's how our brains like to work, ones and zeros. So part of this idea with LGBTQ plus inclusion is that there could be people that don't identify with male or female. And I would say, even with me, and I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I have lots of friends and people I'm close to in this community, non-binary can be really confusing to understand. So I would say the first step is don't worry about understanding it, just worry about accepting it. Just accept that somebody is, and then through conversations, people will explain to you how they've come to that realization for themselves. It is not necessarily an easy thing to understand because we tend to think of one or the other, and we're used to one or the other. Heteronormative, the next slide is going to go on to it a little bit more, but it's the idea that the vast majority of what we have in society is geared around that being heterosexuals as being normal, and anything else is other. So it'll be not that, and I don't want to put that in a negative connotation, that's just how it is. I'm not saying that it should be different. That's just what it is, and I don't want to put any sort of affections on that. Gendered is in the context of, well, we're in a sports room. Certain sports are gendered certain ways. Figure skating is gendered as being feminine, right? Hockey is gendered as being masculine. We have other examples of that, but that's that idea that there are certain things we have, as a society, decided is one or the other. Homophobia, transphobia, the fear or discrimination against people in those communities. Discrimination is prejudice. That's probably a term that's pretty key to everybody. And two-spirited is the Native American sort of belief of having, that somebody could have sort of literally two spirits or two sort of different beings inside of them. It's a form of, not being heterosexual, but it's pretty specific to the Native American indigenous community. So now that we have some terms, I guess we need to figure out why do we need to be inclusive. Actually, I had a note that I missed. It's one of the reasons this is a fun fact. LGBTQ that's the acronym because when people started to use an acronym back in the 70s and 80s, L was put first on purpose as a show of women's rights and gender equality. So lesbian was put ahead of gay because in the rest of society, men come first for the most part. So that was a pretty, it was a very deliberate choice by academics to have that as the acronym. But moving on to why to be inclusive. So moral and ethical arguments, you can say it's the right thing to do. You want to include everyone. It doesn't feel right to exclude somebody. It's probably why most people in this room are here, because you've bought into the idea that it's better to be inclusive, so I've got to figure out a way to help my organization do what we can. The next step is there's also, the non-discrimination and legal arguments. The fact is it's legal to discriminate. We have a Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There's human rights acts in the province and nationally. There's some pretty fundamental rights that are guaranteed in our country for this. So the law kind of says you have to, even if you don't really want to. But also there's a strategic argument, because there's going to be some people that just don't care about the first two. But the fact is that if you're inclusive of everybody, your chances of leaving no stone unturned, your chances of finding a great coach, a great athlete, a great innovator in your sport are higher if you're actively trying to include as many people as possible. So those are three pretty good reasons why to be inclusive, or why to try at least. And we will all try, and we'll all fail, and we'll all have to get better at it. In my own organization, it happens. It's what we do. So, any idea, heteronormativity, what it looks like in society? That idea is that TV shows, books, movies, advertising is mostly shows heterosexual couples or a way of life. There are very, very few characters in TV shows or movies that are something other. And we can all think of, I can think of many examples where there are. I mean, there's shows like Grace and things like that. But the thing is that the vast majority of media is very heterosexual and is very, even if not purposefully discriminatory, there's sort of this idea that almost like gay people don't really exist because you don't see them on screen, and that might be part of the idea. It's also in language, like we say things like mom and pop shops, which seems fine, it is fine, but even that sort of just reinforces that sort of that little idea that it's a mom and pop, and it's not just two moms, right? Or we have at swimming lessons are mom and tot, right? Like, because that's, women go to swimming lessons with their children, not men. What if you don't have a mom? So there's things like that these small little sort of language changes, which is going to be the easiest thing to be more inclusive, are going to be what, moving forward, it's kind of probably the easiest thing for all of us to continue to do. What does it sound like day to day? It's when somebody asks, do you have a boyfriend, to a girl? You've assumed her identity. You've assumed that she's heterosexual, so you're asking if she has a boyfriend. And that can put them in a pretty uncomfortable situation, because if that's not the truth, then people can feel like they're lying by omission. It's that idea that you assume somebody's identity without asking them first. Or or you say to, I love it, there's all these like little baby onesies and stuff, and like there's like the little boy one that's like ladies man, like that. It's funny, it's hilarious, it's great, I love it. Like, I think my nephew has one, but that's an example of heteronormativity, right? You've already decided
At
that
age 1.
at less than age 1 that they are straight, and you've given a sexuality to somebody that can't even speak. So there's that part of it too. And then what does it feel like for the LGBTQ plus person? It can feel like there's nowhere that you belong. That because you don't see yourself portrayed, or because you don't see yourself in movies. That's more of a diversity thing in general, but without seeing yourself in day-to-day activities and day-to-day life, that you maybe don't belong in day-to-day life, which then puts you on the outskirts of everything. And it can be pretty reinforcing time after time to hear some of these things. Skip that video. So a lot of the LGBTQ plus inclusion is trying to fight against or supplement that heteronormative stance of most of the world. This is a picture. This is from an ad campaign, an NBC ad campaign from a few years ago. I picked it for a very specific reason. Number one, identifying the athletes would be very difficult for most people, I think, aside from one. So visibility is still going to be an issue. But the main reason I picked this ad is there's not a single gay white man in the picture. As a gay white man, I can tell you that I'm way more represented than everybody else. For a lot of media, having a lot of TV shows, having, you know, the one gay character is almost always, or was until very recently, almost always like the sassy gay friend who was always white, right? Always. And that's not just in media. In academic research, almost all the research is on men. There's almost no research on women. It's almost all university-based research, which inherently skews towards higher socioeconomic backgrounds. There's close to nothing on people from the trans community. So I'm about to go into some stats and some numbers, but keeping in mind that even that, it's not a true representation of everybody, because even the people doing the research aren't asking everybody in the community. So these are stats straight from Statistics Canada. The most recent ones I could find. I also thought it was important to use Canadian stats. Finding American stats is easy, but we're not the States, and we have our own hurdles. We also have some advantages in Canada. So the first two, if you add them together, that's 3%. So 3% of the Canadian population self-identified as either lesbian, gay, or bisexual in the last, in the 2015 version of the census. 2014, which is 2015. Which is not a small number. 3% is over 1 million people. There are estimates out there that put it as high as 10% of the population. Estimates are estimates. So I'm going to go with 3% of people who self-identify. So they wrote out on the questionnaire, yes, I am one of these two. As an idea, 3% of the world's population is 225 million people, which would be the 5th largest country in the world. So it's not, in bigger terms, it's not a small number of people in the broader sense. And I thought that with millennials and in the younger generation, the number is higher, mostly just because of people being, the younger they are, moving forward, there's a bit more of youth and younger adults feeling comfortable with identifying as something different and not feeling it necessarily as much they have to fit a role. There's also, I've done some research in the Canadian Community Health Survey. So about 1/3 of people in the community say that most days are quite a bit or extremely stressful. Which is 7% more than the regular population. The difference, but not maybe a big one. The bigger differences come with some of the other numbers that people in the community are between 2 and 4 times more likely to be the victim of a violent crime. And that's crime that's associated with being a member of the community. So it is, the two times are lesbian women, gay men tend to be 2 times more likely to be victim of violent crime. Transgendered people tend to be 4 times more likely to be victim of violent crime. So there's a lot of other reasons why that can come about, but that's just what the pure numbers tell us. There's also a study in Ontario that was done in 2015 called the Trans Pulse Project. So this is some numbers specifically for our trans youth in particular. But almost 60% couldn't get academic transcripts with the right name or pronoun. So if they had gone to university and maybe they were Jane Smith and since university, they've changed their name, they've changed their gender, even if it's on official birth certificate documents, and now they are Sam Smith. 60% said they couldn't get the transcripts changed to recognize their new gender. 20% have been physically or sexually assaulted for being transgender, and the bottom one is probably where we go, not in Canada, but 10% have been refused emergency room care for being trans. That means they've gone to an emergency room and they've been told that I won't help you because I don't agree with you. So these are numbers from 3 years ago from Ontario. This is not Texas. We're talking about somewhere that we probably think this would never happen. And it does. It doesn't happen that often, but 10% is still a large number of people in the trans community who have said they've been refused care for being trans. It might have been 20 years ago that they refused care. It may not have been a super recent incident, but nonetheless, it has happened to them. These ones are a bit harder to see. Move on. So for youth in particular, which I think a lot of us are dealing with or are working with, between 30 and 45% have attempted suicide. So with most youth, the suicide rate is quite low. It's something around between 10 and 20 that have contemplated suicide. We're talking between a third to a half that have actually attempted suicide. So that's something to keep in mind when we're dealing with our athletes is there are a lot of other social and sometimes mental stressors that go on them. So they're 14 times more prone to suicide and substance abuse than people not in the community. There's some stats on being verbally harassed. So women, 55%, 42% for gay men, and our trans people, it's 68%. Physical harassment or assault is 20% for the community as a general. So 20% of people have been physically harassed or assaulted. And students have been sexually harassed. Lesbian or bi, 33%, gay or bi, 40%, trans, almost 50%. These are stats from EGALE, which is egale.ca. It's a Canadian nonprofit that does work in equality. These stats are very, very recent. They're also from 2016, 2015, and these were high school students. So this is not adults saying in their 30s or 40s, when I was in high school, this happened. These are people who are probably now 17 to 20 saying when they were in high school 3 years ago, it was this is the stats from that time. And then there's a pretty big link between LGBTQ plus and mental health. Homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder in one way or another in Canada until 30 years ago, to 1987. Gender identity disorder existed until 2013. It was named to gender dysphoria. That would be somebody who's transgender or gender non-binary. It's still in the DSM as dysphoria, but it's no longer classified as a disorder, which it doesn't mean a whole lot when it comes to how you treat somebody or how you help them transition. But to somebody who's maybe going through that, it's different to at least not have what you feel labeled disorder. Disorder sounds pretty negative. There's double the risk for PTSD. There's much higher rates of depression, anxiety, OCD, phobic disorders, suicide, self-harm, substance abuse. They're all higher in the community. Cause and effect isn't quite there. Most of our stats tell us that it's more of a relation to the pressures that people from the community tend to feel or put on themselves from maybe not feeling accepted by broader society, and that resonates with some of these mental health disorders. I think this is like the last of the depressing pictures or stats. This is a picture of the world, a map of the world. So Everywhere in dark blue is where gay marriage is legal. Same-sex marriage is legal. The sort of progresses in shades of blue, where it's maybe a civil union, maybe it's not legal there, but they recognize if it's somewhere else. The places in gray, gay marriage isn't legal, but there's no laws against it. So it's a half win. India was not one of these ones until 3 weeks ago when they had a recent Supreme Court ruling in that country. The kind of beige ones, so Russia and China, there's no laws against being lesbian and gay, but there's laws against the promotion of it. So pride parades are illegal. You can't have, there's not supposed to be gay characters in movies. That's kind of the idea. So being gay isn't illegal, but showing it off is. So yellow, these are countries that have laws on the books that it's illegal, you can go to prison, but it's not enforced. At least hasn't been recently. Light orange is where you can go to prison for being gay. Most of these places, they only really care about men. They don't care about women's sexual orientations. Most of the laws have to do with men. The dark orange is up to life in prison for being gay. And the dark brown, so Saudi Arabia, Iran, a couple others, Sudan, there's a death penalty. So there's a death penalty for being gay. So this is the world as a whole. I mean, we kind of live in sometimes our North American bubble, I think. And that's just to say, later on, we talked about maybe interacting or coaching or coaching athletes that come from different backgrounds. Somebody who's moved to Canada and has grown up in Iran and is gay is going to have a completely different mindset, a completely different experience than somebody who grew up in Halifax. Right? So we're going to try to unpack some of that a bit later as well, but that's more or less why I brought this up. Also, for instance, I'm a coach. I coach a national team member for gymnastics. When I travel internationally, there's going to be some considerations I have to make to if it's safe for me to go certain places as a coach. All right. So, how can we make our organizations more inclusive? How can we as coaches be more inclusive? What are some common pitfalls and what are some great things already happening? This I'm gonna be a little bit more dependent on you guys to give me a little bit of feedback here. So, are we all coaches? Or is anybody involved in like sort of the organizational level of your sport or your club or your team? Yeah, a few of us are. Okay, because there's going to be different sort of hats we put on depending on where we are. So, I guess I'll go with how can we make our organizations more inclusive. It kind of starts with policies. We have to have the right policies in place in our organizations to be more inclusive. And then we have to educate our coaches, our athletes, our parents, our officials, whoever's involved, all what those policies are, and try to really encourage them to buy in to the inclusion policies. So things like how do we integrate, like policies on how to integrate trans athletes, and don't put somebody in a compromising position or situation. That's an example. Does anybody have any other examples of what they can do to make? You can put team there instead of organization. I think that works just as well. More inclusive. It kind of starts with policies, right? You have to have people out there who you have to have the right framework, so people can look at something and say, okay, this is something I can actually do.
I know this type of education for us, like I hear from a lot of the coaches that are just uncomfortable in general and unsure of like the terminology. And so I think like part of everyone being more inclusive is this sort of education too.
Yeah, and I think for sure, I guess kind of goes to the next one. How can we as coaches be more inclusive? Is if you're uncomfortable talking about the topic, is you've got to find a way to feel more comfortable. And that might be not talking about it with your athletes first. It might be finding somebody else that's not in your sporting world to ask questions or to get comfortable using terminology. Because if you're not comfortable having the conversation, as a coach, as soon as you start the conversation, the athletes and the parents think you're the expert, even if you aren't. I think we all know that. Like if I go to an athlete and I start talking about nutrition, they automatically assume I know every answer, and I don't. I have whatever the MCC has taught me and what I know for myself, and then I normally say, go see the nutritionist, right? Like you need enough to kind of go with that. So one thing we can do is appropriate topics of discussion. So, saying, hey Laura, did you check out the Cute Ontario Boys? Probably not the right way to go about it because you don't know. You're assuming something of Florida, right? If we create an open dialogue with athletes and reaffirm support, and we try to get to a point where we're never assuming sexuality.
The question is, you said that though, it may not be the coach that says that, it could be the teammate that says that to the other kid. Let's go out and check out the Cute Ontario guys, right?
Yeah.
So 4 or 5 athletes say, yeah, let's go,
Yeah.
I'm up for it, but then there's that 6th or the 7th athlete who...
It's funny you mention that. In my own club, I had another coach ask me pretty much the exact same question Monday. So 2 days ago, I had the exact same question asked of me because she coaches teenage girls. And she's like, there's a pretty big age spread, and they're talking about boys. And she's like, how do I appropriately interject in the conversation so that if somebody doesn't like boys, they don't feel left out? And it's really, really hard. Honestly, the easiest way to do it, and what we found the solution there is one girl in the group who's particularly outgoing, particularly accepting. She's kind of the ringleader, so we created an ally. We found somebody in the group who, would maybe, when that topic came up, would try to steer the conversation away from just boys to, do you like someone? Anyone? And that sometimes having a peer in the group who is comfortable speaking up is easier because it doesn't sometimes feel so much like mom or dad are getting mad at me for not saying the right thing. It's a friend or a peer in the group turning the conversation. Easier said than done in some group dynamics, obviously, but that's one way to when something happens sort of spur of the moment to try to direct it differently. But it's a really good question because it's one thing as a coach, you can control what you say, but the bigger the team, the bigger the group, the harder it is to control everything, right? Oh, for sure. Some common pitfalls. I'll go into that next. There's a lot of those. There's a video that does much better justice than I can. It's more of just, there's a lot of easy to avoid kind of silly situations that sometimes we can get ourselves in when we're talking about certain topics that we can kind of avoid. But I think this is maybe a really good one, is in our teams, in our organizations, what are some great things already happening? What are some things that are happening either with you or around you, or that you see maybe other people are doing in your organization or others that you say, you know what, that's a pretty good idea and I'm proud that this is happening, or that's a great idea and I think I'm going to want to try to adopt it. Do we have any examples of that? Because that's probably a really good use of our own resources here, right? Yeah.
I guess a couple of years ago, BNS had a pretty public statement in support of transgendered athletes playing whatever gender they identified with. They would support that athlete competing club season at provincial. And, I'm not sure if it went any further than that. I haven't heard anything since, but
They're one of the few that, yeah.
Media and stuff like that.
Yeah. That is great. Like that's a fantastic public statement. Is a great thing to do. I can give you an example from my own club. When we do registration, we don't require a gender to be put on a registration form. And when parents register on the form, it's parent 1, parent 2, not mother, father.
That's a good,
So those are
easy change. That,
small, really easy changes.
Yeah.
Like it's changing a form. It's not especially the parent 1, parent 2. That's a really easy change to do. Any other sort of things that we're doing or that we know are happening in sport that we think are good and positive?
I know there's been some talk from Sport Canada to remove male, female, or add other to because as an NSO, so all of our provincial associations are supposed to collect membership and sex because the NSO has to report it to Sport Canada, and they're finally having that conversation. They still haven't figured out what do you put. Is it male, female, other? Is it every definition you put up? What is it? Because they still want the stats.
Yeah.
So it started, but they're not there yet. Yeah.
The lockers, when you go into the lockers.
So only 2 options.
That's 3 options.
Is there now the added the other? Okay. So it's starting, yeah.
And it's a trend. I mean, even just as of today, I don't know. It was on the Chronicle Herald website at 4:30 today that in Nova Scotia people can change their birth certificate now to have an X.
Oh, good.
As of today.
Okay.
And you don't have to have the gender shown on a birth certificate anymore. You can choose not to. And anybody that needs a gender change on the birth certificate or sex change on the birth certificate can do it for free.
That's good.
There's no fee associated with it. So that's not sport specific, but that's a pretty and part of the article, whoever from the government was talking was saying it was almost a no-brainer because it was a really, really easy change to implement. So finding those easy changes that aren't going to get clogged up in a lot of red tape, that you don't need a lot of support for, you can just kind of do because they don't cost much and they don't really change what you're doing day to day. It's probably the best place to start for a lot of these things.
And 2 of our guys online, so I'll just share with everyone. So one says, in Derby, we try not to say great job girls or great job guys. Instead, we say great job friends or something like that, they said. And then Canoe Kayak, they said, we allow participants to register as gender of their identity, no explanation required. And also then Derby said, when we introduce ourselves in a circle of new people, we state what pronouns we would like to use. So those were some examples from the group online.
And I think the age that we're coaching also directs a lot of the conversations we have. Anybody coaching kind of that the age group I coach, which is that 14 to 18 age group, is probably the hardest one.
Yeah.
Adults, you can tend to be easier to have frank conversation with. Really young kids, also sometimes so oblivious to the broader world, it's easy to have a conversation with them. It's that sort of junior high, some high school aged athletes that tend to be the hardest because coaching them is the hardest, but having these conversations with them can also be the hardest because they are probably some of the ones that are trying to figure out some of these identity issues. So some things we can do, pretty easy. We respect personal boundaries. So if somebody doesn't feel comfortable talking about sexuality or gender or who they like or who they don't, trying to, although as coaches we wouldn't really push it, trying to create an environment where, you know what, if one of the girls doesn't want to talk about the Ontario boys, that we don't allow the rest of the team to sort of push her too hard. You got to remember past experiences are all different. Keeping in mind some of those stats from earlier, we don't know what people have experienced. A lot of LGBTQ people have had issues with assault, suicide attempts, substance abuse, but that doesn't mean they all have. So the past experiences of everybody that's going to be in the discussion are going to be different, just like in any discussion. So we have to just sort of respect that everybody's past and what they feel is different. No two experiences are the same. So my experience is not going to be the same as somebody else's. I've not really had much of a negative experience. That's my upbringing, my family, the sport I've been in. I've had no real problems, but could be the exception. I don't know. It's my experience. And many of us will never be able to fully understand somebody else's identity. That's okay. You don't fully understand. It's all right. So there's also a few kind of intersectional issues. So this idea that being part of the community is one part of somebody's identity, but race, gender, language, religion, socioeconomic background, mental health, substance abuse, these are all things that somebody else could be experiencing. So somebody who is, for example, me, I'm a white cisgender male, I speak English from an upper middle class family, so I'm one of the least disadvantaged people in this group, right? I can walk into most rooms and most places and be listened to, be respected, be heard, and that's fine. I haven't had a lot of negative experiences. I've had some, but not many. But if we can switch our brain to somebody who is Southeast Asian, so like Indian subcontinent, male to female, transgender, so they were born a man, they're transgendering to be a female. They don't speak English as a first language. Maybe they're Muslim, maybe they're from a lower socioeconomic background, maybe they have bipolar disorder and an addiction to painkillers. Suddenly, that's a pretty extreme experience. But that person there's so many other things that they have to deal with, and they don't all come down to necessarily being a part of the LGBTQ plus community. You know, there's other things that may be happening there, and being a double or triple or quadruple minority makes things that much harder.
So as a coach, that's like, okay, you need like, I'm going to say this word, I might be saying it, but that person needs to be more, needs to talk to a counselor or somebody. Like, I'm a coach who coaches cross-country skiing or whatever sport I'm coaching. Like, I can't help you. I'm sorry.
And
like, I can't deal with substance abuse.
No,
like,
exactly.
I don't have
You
a
can't.
weird, you know, I don't have a feel for substance abuse. I don't know what.
Oh no, it's just like if somebody came to me
like
with,
if somebody comes with, I'm going to use the word baggage now. Maybe I'm going to say the wrong term, but comes with all of that. Wow. And I'm here because I'm going to coach my sport.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's my, you know, there's more to it than.
Oh yeah.
I hope that's what you're trying to say here.
Oh, there is so much more to it, and there's not much that we can do, and there's not anything we probably should do to try to help with much of this. Yeah. Just like if I have an athlete come to me with a pain in their knee that's been there for 6 months and it's not going away, I can't diagnose that. I might have an idea of what it is, but I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose it. I got to send them to a professional. Somebody has an eating disorder, they have to be sent to a professional. We can't deal with that as coaches. All I wanted to try to make sure that we're aware of is that somebody like me is going to probably have an easier time adjusting to the sport dynamic than somebody who has a few other.
So maybe I'm wrong. I want to, sorry,
Go for it.
But maybe my perception's wrong again, but a lesbian up front, I think people are more comfortable with that. Now, if you were trans and you were talking, I would have and that's just me. My end, like, okay, this is like, where's this person coming from, right? I mean,
and that's
society, I think, has started to move. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Towards more of acceptance and understanding of lesbians and gays and bisexuals. I mean, that's just. But once you start getting into the trans and that's more out there. How can when I say that? That's more. That's more of it. Maybe society hasn't been exposed to that.
And that's part of
much.
it. But and that's part of it is that media and the broader society. It's starting now more, but it's really only started in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's really only started because, honestly, like Netflix has put out a bunch of very inclusive shows and movies, and they got ahead of the curve, and then other people like, okay, make some money off of it, like we'll join in too. But all I can say is most people in a setting like this, especially if talking to other adults, I'm happy to answer most questions. I can only answer questions that relate to me.
Yeah.
But most people would feel the same way. Is they don't mind being asked questions. People will answer questions if you have them, and you just gotta ask. Don't be afraid to ask the question. You might get an answer that is not perfect, but at least you'll get something. And we're not going to solve all the problems. We're never going to solve all the problems or all the issues. It's just kind of I guess, even if we just get to a point where we are aware that all these things are out there, that's a pretty big step forward.
So I'm going to ask something like when you ask questions. If I was a learning facilitator, and as initially, okay, I look at my audience, I say, male, female. So now my question is, when I sort of say to the group, how do you identify? Would that be the best? Like, do you open that up right up at the front?
You could, or we could do one of the things like what roller derby said was when they introduce themselves by their name and what pronouns would like to be used. I'm Nick. I use him, him, and his pronouns.
Yeah.
That would be the first few times you do it. I'm sure they'll be very uncomfortable for most people to ask that question and to also be in the room answering that question. Particularly if you're not a member of the LGBTQ plus community, you probably would never be asked that in your life. You go, okay, I don't know, but that's one way to pretty easily at the beginning of discussion allow people to, and if somebody's not comfortable, they can choose what information to give. That way, instead of trying to pull something out of somebody, they can choose what to put forward. And something like that might just be a really small, positive step forward when you're, especially in like a learning facilitator group or a group of people that you maybe don't know very well. You were gonna get the question or statement.
Yeah, no, I just we mentioned substance abuse. I think a role of a coach is not to, we don't have to be, or nor can we be experts in every field, but you need to create an environment where it's welcoming. So the fact of the matter is I think people are more likely to come to us as coaches than they are to a teacher or even to a parent. So I think, even with a session like this, it's great for us just to educate ourselves a little bit. So I think it's important, I'm far from an expert in any of this, but I think it's important for us to understand that we don't have to be experts. Sometimes you're like I don't know the right term, but you got to be an ear and you got to maybe and help them if they do need to be pointed in a different direction. section that you have that information.
Yeah, and I guess part of it would be like, my hope would be that if somebody was doing a presentation on diversity in sport, or if somebody was doing a presentation on religion in sport, or mental health in sport, this slide would still be up there. Knowing that that's just one part of what somebody might be going through, and that's just all to kind of say is that they might be having problems being part of the team because of being in the LGBTQ plus community. But you know what? If English isn't their first language and they are a racial minority, it's going to be that much harder for them than somebody like me, born and raised in Halifax and white.
And a coach online just said further to this is we need to understand our own privilege and where we're all coming from.
Yeah. It's there's a whole. I think you could do a whole presentation just on privilege, but I've seen a few videos online. One of the ones I like the best is kind of a visual representation of privilege. Is this idea of like a classroom setup where there's 3 or 4 rows, and like if I gave all of you a ball of paper to throw in the recycling bin, you all have equal chance of getting it. But the closer you are to the bin, the more likely you have, the better your chances to getting it in. You could all win, but you're at a way better chance of winning than somebody else just because of where you started. And that's kind of the idea of privilege. It's just because of where you started, sometimes you have a leg up on everybody else. All right, this idea of coming out. We have to expect, like, why do we expect this from people? Maybe we don't expect it. But it can be a scary process for someone, because I can tell you, even if you know that 99% sure it's going to be okay, that 1% is enough to stop you from doing it. Or at least pause. It's anxiety over anything. It can be really, really hard for some people based on their backgrounds from the previous slide. So religious backgrounds can play a really big part to this one, cultural backgrounds. And it's not a one-time deal. So this idea that, like, I didn't just once when I was like 18 have to say, hey, we're good.
And then it's like stamped.
It's just stamped on me, right? I did it at the beginning of the presentation. Every time I meet a new group of people, every time I get to know somebody new, I, at some point, have to mention that I'm gay, or that comes up in conversation somehow. So for somebody who is a part of the community, it's something that happens over and over and over again throughout their entire life. Particularly, it can be particularly scary for somebody who's maybe in the transgender community, because every romantic partner they have, do they meet somebody knowing that they are trans? Right? If you're at a bars and you want to pick up people, but let's assume you're at a bar, not on Tinder or something, and somebody asks you for your number, that's an easy, you could see the scenario where the person asking for the number may not know if the second person is transgendered, right? So then that's another thought of, okay, if I tell them what's going to happen, are they going to be accepting? Like, what do I do? So for that particular person, that's a very much an ongoing coming out that can be very stressful every single time they do it. And there can be some really deep-seated and personal issues surrounding it. So those background ideas, the religion, there are lots of religious organizations that are very, very accepting and very, very comforting for LGBTQ plus people. There are some that aren't. There are some cultural backgrounds that are very accepting. There are some that aren't. You can imagine that somebody who lives in an urban setting, like if you live in Halifax or you live somewhere significantly bigger like Toronto, it may be easier to come out because it may be easier to find somebody else like you out there. If you're from, I don't know, Sheet Harbor, and it's a small community, you may be feeling like you're the only person. And statistically, you might be the only person or one of the only people. So that idea of coming out and then not finding anybody like you can be pretty tough too.
Just a good example on this one, like for coaching, I had a 15-year-old young athlete from Manitoba I traveled with a couple years ago, and she was scared to come out to a new team, so her mother emailed me, and I had to like deliver her message to the team before we went away because she was so scared to tell my team, and she was just traveling with us. And it was, for me, it was an interesting experience, like getting this email and going, okay, and then having to like figure out how to
facilitate it.
Yeah, and like prepare everyone to be accepting before we met her, and yeah.
And it can be, and similar in that even in my own sport, there's been trying to be a data gathering, some research on past national team members or a member of the LGBTQ plus community to figure out what their experiences were in the sport, so what can we do better. And we found one man in the last 30 years who was out. We found 0 women on the women's national team who were comfortable coming forward with 0. One rhythmic gymnast who seemed to be the exception, not the norm. And in trampoline, it was a little bit different. Trampoline's in our sport, it's a different beast, and there's it's a different community. But even in our sport, at the national team level, we found 3 people who've competed between the early 90s and today on 3 different national teams, 3 people who were coming out. There's probably more people a part of the community, but nobody else was comfortable being out. And only the man on the men's national team was out when he was still a part of the sport. The woman didn't come out until after.
Is the term bad? It sounds like coming out to me sounds negative.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea, coming out from being in the closet and hiding. I can understand how it can have maybe a negative connotation
But I'm a
to
young
it.
kid who feels the need to come out, and the term is coming out. I'm just going to stay where I am.
Yeah, I think it's more of I think it's meant to kind of, and maybe for somebody who, I think it's meant to maybe describe the feeling of it, is that it feels like you are hiding who you are, and then you decide to let people know. There's probably a more convenient, more inclusive way to say it, but that's kind of the term that we're stuck with at this point. But that's kind of what it is. It's meant to say, like, the feeling of somebody literally being stuck in a closet or hiding in a closet and then opening up the door and coming out of the closet, and that's representative of coming out. There are lots of hilarious videos online of what if straight people had to come out. Watch a couple, they're really funny. It makes you think about like just how ridiculous this whole idea is that somebody's sexual identity matters that much to the rest of us that they need to say it. Yeah. But it's when you see it flipped, it's pretty funny. Not always most appropriate, but pretty funny. So, transgender and gender non-conforming people. We talked about pronouns, come out a couple times, using him, his, her, him, he, him, his, she, her, hers, and they, them, theirs. People, what does it matter if somebody wants to be called them or they? It really doesn't.
People still struggle with that so bad, though.
Yeah.
I was pregnant 4 years ago, and I called them they, and everybody asked me if I was having twins. And I said, no, they're not born yet. They're a they. We don't know. And they were like, a they? Like, and
Yeah.
I got so much weird books, you know? It's like, well, I don't know what they are. Therefore, they are a they. Like, but it's the understanding is not.
I think it's one of those things that we use they a lot, maybe in written form when we're talking about somebody that we don't know their gender of. But in face-to-face verbal communication,
people don't understand it.
Doesn't. We still aren't used to using that as a term to represent one singular person.
No.
some other issues around attire in sport. What is safety versus what is comfort? So one is adhering to a dress code or a uniform based on safety, function, or what is just part of style and tradition. And that might be, there's not a lot we can do necessarily in some of our sports. And in some team sports, it's really not that much different between the two genders. Some other sports, it can be. In my sport, it's very different. So that idea of what, right?
Yeah.
So it's very different. So why is it necessary, and what are the reasons behind somebody having to wear one thing versus another if they're a male or female? Up until recently, women's beach volleyball, they had to wear that like tiny bikini.
Yeah.
They don't have to anymore, but it wasn't until that long ago that that was the dress code. I imagine. I remember. So if you're maybe a male to female transitioning transgender person who isn't fully like, how can you abide by the dress code? And that's one that, I mean, the dress code was purely for selling seats and advertisements on TV. There was no reason why. It's not more functional than just wearing a t-shirt. Like, that is purely marketing. Some pretty genius marketing, but that's just purely marketing, right? So that's an example of one that, okay, that's not really safety. That is something that, that you can change. Hairstyles, that's kind of a holdover from my sport-specific one. But gender non-conforming people or transgender people, it tends to be something that's pretty important to them, is how they get to style their hair and wear their hair, because we still think long hair is feminine, short hair is masculine. It's the way we as a society for the most part view it. So how people get to style their hair is important for people in the community. Puberty's gonna suck for everybody. It's gonna suck even more for somebody in this community. The body's changing, hormones, maybe the hormones that are making their body into something they don't really feel is theirs. So just knowing that puberty's gonna be terrible. Media portrayals, until very recently, there was no portrayals in the media. You couldn't find a trans person in any TV show or movie unless it was set in the 80s and they were dying of AIDS, or if they were a prostitute. Those are literally the only examples of a trans person in media up until very, very, very recently. And still, right now, most of the ones you find have tragic storylines. They come from a terrible upbringing, and they lived on the streets, and they don't have a significant other, and they die in the end. That's what most trans kids see. They see in TV shows and they see on movies that, okay, I might be able to live my life, but it's not going to go very well. And then sexual orientation versus gender identity. This one can be pretty confusing, I think, for some people. So gender identity is, am I male? Am I female? Am I neither? This idea of being transgendered. And then sexual orientation is, who do you like? Do I like women? Do I like men? Do I like both? Do I like neither? Do I like everything in between? So let's say I'm transgender. Let's say I am transitioning to be a woman, and I like women. So as a man, I would be a straight man, but once I transition, I'm a male to female lesbian. That's the whole equation changes. Right? So gender identity is who you feel you are. Sexual identity is who you want to be with or don't want to be with. And there can be a lot of crossover. All right. So I have a few scenarios that I've come up with that, how can we deal with some of this? I don't have a lot of notes on these, so we need some input. And then at the end, I have one that I think is going to be pretty common to all sports, and it's a pretty major one that maybe some of us have some really good solutions for. So this first one is actually a direct example from something that happened at my club in last year, year before. So we had a non-binary athlete who was in our recreational trampoline class. They didn't want to put up their hair into a ponytail because they thought it made them look too much like a girl. However, it's unsafe to have their hair down. You can't be doing trampoline with your hair down because you get caught in the springs. It's actually dangerous.
Yeah.
So all of our trampoline athletes have to have their hair up. So, do.
Safety issue. Safety issue should trump anything, right?
And safety issue is important, and it would trump everything, but there's a way, we found a way to accommodate the athlete without forcing them to put their hair in a ponytail.
Buns
Which
are.
was,
Sort of a bandana, maybe?
we gave them the option of wearing a headband, or a toque, or a bandana, something that wasn't going to fly off, but something that was going to keep everything safe, and that they could still have their hair down if they wanted to. And that's what they chose to do, and it worked. It worked for them. But that's a sense of, there might be some out-of-the-box thinking. If it was a competitive trampoline athlete doing significantly more difficult, intricate things that have more risk involved, there may not have been the chance to compromise. But for us, where it was a recreational athlete, they come there 1 hour once a week. It's just one of the things they do because they want to bounce on a trampoline, and their parents probably felt like it was maybe a bit better than doing it without supervision. It was probably the best option for them. And this is actually a really good learning experience for the coach. The coach that was coaching is one of our full-time staff members. And the coach had a really hard time and would slip up often with saying that the athlete was a she instead of using the term they. And the coach said that her favorite thing was that she made the mistake about half the time, but always corrected herself and apologized for it. And then when the kid got a report card at the end of the term, the correct pronouns were used, and the athlete and their parents and went to the coach afterwards and thanked the coach for trying. And that was it. Even the 12-year-old really just cared that somebody was trying. They failed 50% of the time, but they were trying to use the terminology, and that was good enough for them. And I think that's a pretty good lesson for all of us, is that we're going to fail at it a lot, but as long as we're trying to do it, the kids, they get it. The athletes, they understand that we're not used to it, but they'll appreciate it.
The pronoun always seems to be hardest.
Yeah.
Have somebody come tell me that Brian, not Brianna.
Yeah.
Easy. That's an easy one to get the name right.
Yeah. It's
See them on the street.
she.
You see them in here, walk past. Hey Brian, how are you?
Yeah.
Right? When you see Brian playing a sport, it's very easy to say, oh, look how fast she is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of a sudden.
Because it's so automatic.
Because it's been there from years past.
Yeah.
I knew her.
Yeah.
I know him, but I knew her.
Yeah.
Right.
And that pronoun always becomes very
And it's really even, I don't know if you can tell, even with me reading this, and I've given this presentation before, I still had to consciously think of using they, them, theirs. It's
That
not,
one's particularly hard. I've got a friend that relates as non-binary, and 90% of the time, I will be the one to screw it up and have to apologize. But it's really hard to do.
but you probably also, hopefully,
Or trying.
just the fact that you're trying means the most to most of these people. And I think if anything else, if you don't get anything else out of this, it's just somebody that's in the community. We are not looking for the whole world to change. It's just that there's an honest effort to make the small changes we can. And if we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay.
We have a coach just asking, in that scenario one, how or did they work with the other athletes in like perception of the situation to make sure the other kids didn't then think that being feminine was wrong?
So the athlete had a fairly gender non-specific name, which helped. But it really didn't come up.
Okay. Because I can see what he's getting at, like, okay, you all need to hear up.
It's an individual sport,
Mm.
and although they're all taking their class at the same time, it's not the same as a team environment. So that's
The other kids didn't
part
ask,
of it.
or
The other kids didn't ask.
Okay.
And they really didn't care. And the athlete was the one who asked to be identified as them, they, theirs. So the coach just said, you know, this is so and so, and always just in conversation trying to use that, and the other athletes picked up. It's a small. This particular scenario, the number of trampoline athletes in recreational class is probably 6, 7. It's not a large number of athletes. It's not a team environment. They're doing their recreational class once a week. So it's not like it's their friends in the class with them. It's not a scenario where a lot of these other sort of outside factors would really influence it too much. So it's almost like the perfect storm of where you could do it and do it well and be really successful in it. And that in a lot of other cases and scenarios, it would be significantly tougher. Significantly tougher. So scenario 2 is there's an athlete we coach having noticeable changes in their behavior, and we think it might be related to struggling with identity or sexuality. So what do we do? That's a hard one. Yeah.
I had a similar situation to this. Well, a couple with a friend first, a couple friends when something like this was going on, then with an athlete as well. Just kind of treat it not like any other situation, but just approach them in a way that I'm not prying for anything. Just kind of bring that pull inside, and it's nice there's the opportunity, not pulling them over the crowd, and just ask them, hey, things going on, you know, because something I always say with my athletes is I'm here to talk no matter what it is. Talk to me about anything, it doesn't have to be the sport. If you're having an argument with your brother or sister, it can be anything. You know, it's not prying for answers, saying, hey, if I noticed you haven't been yourself lately, what's going on? I'm here to talk. I'm not just a talent coach. I'm whatever else you need. So.
Yeah. And that's and from my own personal experiences, as on both sides, that is the best way. That is all you can do is leave yourself open or as an opening in case somebody needs it. It can asking directly, which may, even if you have all the best intentions, if somebody's not ready to come out, asking directly can feel aggressive, and it can feel, for instance, when I was 15, I had a coach who asked me directly, and I wasn't ready, and I said no. But then I've now lied to them, and now I feel like every time I talk to them about something, it's a lie that's going and going and going. So that's just one thing that if somebody's ready, they will probably tell you as long as you create a situation that is inviting and open and ready to deal with it. And things like modeling inclusive behavior as best you can. Using, although I really like it in some scenarios because it helps me feel more included, with other scenarios it's really confusing for me when people say the term spouse or partner instead of husband or wife. It's at the same time very, very inclusive, but very, very nondescript. So you can leave yourself to not knowing what's going on, but it's just using a term like that, who's like a partner or a partner instead of a wife or a girlfriend or whatever. It's a pretty easy change as well. So we have an athlete who's biologically female who wants to join a boys-only team. This is This is kind of a non-starter, honestly, anymore. It's the law they get to. I don't know if we all realize that it actually is. It is the law. You can identify whatever gender you identify with. You can be identified as that gender, so you can go ahead with that. It's pretty recently that's been clarified, but that is how it is. There are maybe certain biological factors with testosterone and whatnot that at a certain level that we take it into account. But for this one, which is a female transitioning to a male or a female who wants to join the boys only team, we have to allow for the scenario is not super clear. Somebody who is a female and identifies as a woman who wants to join the boys only team, that is not necessarily easy to fix. If there is a women's only option, that may be based on policies or how the sport is run, they may have to go that route. But if they're biologically female who's gender non-conforming or transgender, but they identify as a man, then they're allowed.
How do you deal with it in your sport when they're two completely different sports?
That's
true.
It is completely different. We have the policy in place that we allow it. It has yet to happen. So I can say that we allow it, and that's what the policy says, but I can't sit up here and tell you that for sure that's how it would happen, because it's not happened for us. Beyond a recreational level, it's not happened for us. So,
But they're not event specific at the younger ages.
Yeah.
But since they hit a pre-competitive level, you've got these 6 events or these 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have policies in place that allow it, and if they could succeed at doing that, we could. In the U.S. collegiate, not the NCAA's, but the sort of the club collegiate system they have in the States, there have been men competing in women's gymnastics and women competing in men's gymnastics. That is the only example I could find. It's not NCAA's, so it's not a very high level at all, but there is examples of that out there. But I can't sit here and tell you that it works really great, because it's not happened to my sport yet.
And internationally, that's still being figured out, isn't
Yes.
it? Like at the IOC level,
At the
they're
IOC,
still saying,
There's still
we're
a
not
lot
sure.
So
Yeah.
beyond sort of a provincial, maybe national level, there's still a lot of question marks for some of this, which we great if we could figure out all the answers right here, right now, but I don't think we can. Scenario 4, teenage coach or athlete comes out to you but doesn't want anyone else to know. Yeah. But that can be a hard thing for some people. People love to gossip.
Without realizing
Right?
Right.
People love having information, and sometimes being the only person to know something is really, really tough. So it's really an easy thing to see kind of on paper and in the abstract, but in actual real life of that, it can be hard. Just in any scenario, if you know something, you want to tell. Even if it's just one person, you want to tell. But you have one to avoid that. You have a team. We're gonna think they're 8, but they're pretty young. One of the athletes has 2 dads. You can see confusion. There's confusion with other kids and other participants on how that can be when the topic comes up. That's pretty tricky. As soon as they're that young, you don't want to overstep what the parents' role is in educating their athletes too. I
Talk to 2 dads.
Yeah, and maybe
You
see
know,
like
like sort of, I don't know, I mean, I just think it would be you would have to be able to read this statement, talk to the 2 dads and say, okay, there's been some conversations, how do we want to approach that? Oh,
that's a really, really good example that I didn't think of honestly, but I think you're right, is the people who probably know best how to deal with the situation are people who've lived it.
Yeah.
So,
Or maybe it could be someone else you know, or it's
Yeah.
more comfortable with. Someone in that community.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Because those guys, in the school setting, I'm sure those two dads would have had to deal with that.
Yeah.
Parent teachers or anything like that. So they must have had discussions
already.
already, right? So
And I think that's also, this is like a sport-specific topic and module or lecture, but if anybody knows any teachers who are teachers themselves, they're great resources because they're doing all the same training and inclusivity and trying to use the right language, and sometimes, and they will probably have dealt with many, many more athletes than we have, with many more children than we have athletes, so they probably have some of these scenarios that we've never dealt with, they may have. So that can be a really good resource as well. So the last two I have here for the final one are, so that's the sixth one I kind of talked about earlier. Is somebody's always asked, are they what? Are they gay? Are they lesbian? Are they trans? Are they whatever? They're visibly uncomfortable with the question, but always say no. Now, being visibly uncomfortable with the question, I don't know, probably anybody. I think most of us in this room, if you were asked, would maybe be uncomfortable with the question. So that maybe isn't always the best indicator, but what do we do?
Coach me to, I don't know, one scenario would be, by me answering that question, will it make me kick the ball any harder?
Yeah. I think, and that is pretty good.
That's a good,
To
like that.
avoid giving a direct answer. And you're not lying to anybody, you may not have decided, you may be
Unsure, you may be
unsure.
Well, and there's also
Avoid the direct answer.
and the other
Be a
one
politician.
is as a coach, you can also step in and ask the athletes, why is it an important question?
Yeah.
Why are you asking? Why does it matter?
Yeah.
And if the athletes can't give you a reason why it matters, then maybe it's not a question they need to ask in the first place. That's maybe one, it's tough because you're not always going to be around, right? But if as coaches we overhear what's going on, then we can maybe step in, but we're only there for a certain amount of time. We're not really able to necessarily police everything that happens, but to ask why are we asking the question in the first place?
I think in a situation like that, if we are aware of it, it is kind of our role to address it as as a whole. I mean, if it comes to the point where we're aware and we know it's repeatedly being asked, I think it's kind of our role to either interject some education into it for the group or find a route where it's more open conversation rather than just yes or no, what's that.
Yeah.
Would you do that, like, if that was that one scenario where one athlete kind of repeatedly being asked, would you try to do it as like a whole group, like having that conversation to start as a whole group, or would you maybe try to pull like the kind of key instigators like aside and have that conversation?
I think that's more of a key part of coaching over the science of coaching. I think you probably got to get a feel for the group and the team, but I can see both scenarios being. I think what I would do, or what I actually had to do once, was I took the group as a whole and talked to everybody as one big group, so that nobody felt like they were being isolated as either for asking the question, because it's very possible that there's some people asking who just are inquisitive, and for no other reason than they just want to know, and there's no negative intentions. It's just they're inquisitive. It could be that they are trying to, that it's a sort of a bullying scenario, it's intimidation, but it could just be that they just want to know. But if we ask the group, if we talk to the group as a whole, nobody gets isolated. and we can use it as one big discussion as, that's not, maybe we don't need to talk about identities or stuff as a team, doesn't really help us perform better, so let's move on. Then I would say if it doesn't get any better, that's when you would maybe, just like if any other scenario, the solution doesn't get fixed by talking to the bigger group, then maybe we talk to someone.
And this is also good too, if there's, maybe it's not something having to do with an LGBTQ plus, or maybe it's any other uncomfortable question.
Yeah.
Or,
You're
Yeah.
I think you're totally right. This is probably
It could
any
probably-
uncomfortable question is probably this. How do we deal with an uncomfortable question that one athlete always gets asked? It could be an athlete that
Why do you have two dads?
why do you have two dads, or something that's why don't you have a dad? Why do you only have a mom? And that there are some people that is a really sensitive subject, and maybe they don't want to talk about why they don't have a father. So there's ways of any uncomfortable question. There may be a way to work that through. And then we overhear others at the gym or the arena using LGBTQ plus stereotypes as the punchline of a joke. This is really, as a coach, the easiest way that we can step up and show that we are being allied to the LGBT community or being inclusive is to just not accept it. I had a group of athletes once who, one of the other athletes they assumed was gay, and pretty annoying, and when you've been talking about him in conversation, they would use this like super valley girl, high-pitched, like gay lisp voice when talking about him. So I sat them down and said, "That I don't like that. That's not acceptable. And I used me as the example. Like I personally don't like that, so we're not doing that." And it was done. It had nothing to do with bringing his possible sexuality into it. It's just, I don't like that we're doing this. We're not doing it. It's a pretty easy way to step up and stop it, because sometimes jokes seem harmless, but sometimes they're not. All right. And this is a pretty hard one. How to impact. This is something that probably a lot of us have dealt with or are going to have to deal with. Team travel. So instead of I tried to write a specific team travel event scenario, and there are just so many possibilities.
Yeah, this is probably better. Just talk through it. Yeah.
But here, I guess, more like policy around issues about like how do we do team travel.
Yeah.
We're going through a big sort of review in my own sport in Nova Scotia on how do we reevaluate our team travel policies. Not just because of this topic, but because of other topics as well. So how many athletes do we have in a room? How many athletes do we have in a bed? Does it change on gender? Does it change based on age? How are the rooms divided? If it's a co-ed team or an event, does it change things? So, even as a coach, I've been to an event where there was an odd number of male and female coaches, and the policy is that male and female coaches can't share a hotel room unless they're married. That's whatever the policy was, that's what it was. Well, I'm gay. She was a good friend of mine. Had no problem with it. But the organization was paid for 2 hotel days instead of 1 because it was against the guidelines to have us work together. And there was neither of us had any issue with it, and we couldn't really foresee anybody having an issue with it. But yeah, that's a really odd one that came up. But so one thing that we've had done is we do team travel probably like most organizations, normally you get as many rooms with 2 double beds as possible. You put 4 people in a room and you call it a day.
Yeah.
That's how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
For our athletes, I mean, there's a cost savings. Obviously, 1 in a room versus 2 in a room is a lot cheaper. But we first came across it because we had an athlete about 10 years ago. He was fine. He didn't request to be in a different room. He just requested that he had his own bed. He was 16. He was gay. The people he was rooming with, he knew, so he knew they wouldn't care. But he was just like, I feel uncomfortable sharing a bed with another teenage boy. I prefer my own bed. So we accommodated that. We were able to accommodate that for him. So that's what we did. I guess, what are some other issues people have dealt with team travel or can foresee coming up with team travel or team stay?
I think the co-ed one is a tough one for sport like mine. Snowboard is that, and actually a lot of the sports online, curling, in that, and we've encountered it a few times so far, is we are historically co-ed, so we get the rooms and we split them by gender, or we get a house and the rooms in the house are split by gender, but then we are getting a lot of athletes who are already out and coming with us, and some of the girls have asked, like, should we be split now? Like, and there's just confusion, so we've said, no, you guys are fine as long as everyone's comfortable, share the same room, but the questions are starting, and we're just stuck with the same old.
Well, and then asks you, and then it starts you think about, well, if everybody's fine with it, why are we changing it? Yeah, and the parents are worried about, because we've had the conversation with the parents, they're worried about pregnancy. Yeah. Well, and we've said, like, what the rule on the team is no dating. It doesn't matter who you're dating. So if that's the rule, like, and the parents are really only concerned with pregnancy, then if we split the genders and the rule is no dating, in theory, it should still be fine, but they're also teenagers, so I don't know. Well, yeah, teenagers are teenagers.
Yeah.
This isn't easy.
No,
Coach says they can't.
transgender or an asexual person is going to cause, like, that will cause a whole bunch of discussion.
That's true. That throws
Yeah,
in
like,
there.
okay, and then you're like, where do you want to, like, you're going to have to, where do you feel
Which
comfortable
room
sleeping?
you choose.
Yeah.
So it is not easy. In my own organization, one of the things we did was we were like, okay, well, smaller kids take up less space in a bed, so at a certain age, but like we're dealing with, we do team travel with children as young as 10.
Yeah.
So we have some like and we're gymnastics. We have some very small humans doing team travel.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
we put 4 in a room. Yeah. Sorry, 4 in a room, not 4 in a bed. 4 in a room for our younger athletes, and then for our national championships and our older, pretty much anybody who's a teenager or older, they got a bed themselves.
You've gone to 2 in a room?
We've done 2 in a room.
Okay.
The cost is more, but for all of the issues it helps us avoid, it was kind of necessary. Everybody gets their own bed. They get their own safe space, at least, to sleep. And I mean, that's all we can do is do what we can. If people don't mind bunking together, that's fine. We've had particularly, like 14-year-old girls who are like, but we all 4 of us want to stay in a room together. It's great, and we'll do it. But the rule is that you don't have to. Right? So that's one way that we've done as a medium that works for our sport right now. That doesn't mean it won't change one way or the other moving forward, but that's one way that we've dealt with it. But it's tough. And it's probably even more tough for the scenario of you're doing team travel and somebody is maybe closeted, or maybe they're only out to their best friend on the team or one or two other people, and they don't want to be treated differently as the only person being treated differently, because you get questions if you're treated differently. It's, why does so-and-so get a bed to themselves, or why does so-and-so get a separate room, or have you? So I don't have the answers, yeah.
Yeah, so what I want to say is, like, pro kind of in our sport of curling is that there's only 4 to a team, 4 or 5, so we're usually very tight knit. You know, families usually travel with each player, so in a hotel situation, you usually go with your family. You're comfortable in that sense, which is great. Yeah. Yes, we can typically sort of avoid some of those uncomfortable situations of where do I go, where do I go.
Definitely. That is I think everybody will have a few of the things I've gone over. Areas where you go, okay, well that's easy in my sport, we don't have to worry about that. And then others were like, okay, that would be a really tough hurdle. If you have a hockey team and you're traveling all the time, suddenly the double the amount of rooms is a massive expense. You could probably never feasibly afford.
Yeah.
But on a hockey team, if somebody needs to change, if somebody's transitioning from one gender to another, the uniform doesn't really change. The size of it changes. The uniform doesn't change a whole lot. So, you know, there's some things that make it a bit easier and make it a bit tough depending on the situation. So, any other questions or discussion points? One other thing I did, I don't know if I can bring it up.
Oh, but I can send it out.
I know I can bring it up. I just have to exit. So
The checklist.
I came up with a pretty short, honestly, checklist based off of one I found on eGale, but it's a little bit more sport specific. So this is not all inclusive. I have 3 headings. So 3 categories: policy, environment, and culture, education, and language. And just a checklist of 5 things under each heading of what can we do as an organization, or do we have it on my team or my organization to be more inclusive. So I've sent it to Tasha, and we can send it out to you.
So I'll share it with everyone online and everyone in here, so you guys can have this. Yeah, this will be great to have.
So this is not a be-all, end-all. This is just something that, based on some of the research I've done and my own experiences in sport, that are things we want to look at. So, do you have non-discrimination policies? Is there a policy to address discrimination itself? So it's one thing to have a policy against it, great. But if you have no way to actually deal with it when it happens, that policy means nothing. So if we have a rule that, okay, we don't discriminate on the team, you have to also have the consequence for what happens if we do. Can athletes participate based on their gender identity? Yes, in most situations. Personal boundaries be respected. Can athletes be identified by preferred pronoun? The environment, so things like, is there a gender-neutral bathroom or change room with gender-neutral signage? It's one thing for us to know that the handicap bathroom anybody can use, but if the only sign on it is the handicap bathroom sign, it's not necessary. Some people are going to think, okay, it's only for somebody who needs it as a handicapped person, not for anybody who feels like it's the best choice. Even if we mean it to be for anybody. Do registration forms allow for options beyond simply male-female? The parent 1, parent 2 versus mother-father? Are there any LGBTQ plus positive materials available, particularly maybe during Pride events? And not that we have to do all these things, but that we should, in every situation, do all these things, but these are things to keep in mind. Are instances of homophobic and transphobic graffiti dealt with under a sense of urgency and concern? So, somebody writes in the bathroom stall, are we actually when somebody says this is there, is somebody going to paint it over pretty quickly, or is it being left there for 4 weeks until somebody finally remembers to get around to it? This is going to obviously change. Not all sports have full control over their facilities. In my sport, we're club-oriented, so we own our building, we own our property, we own everything in it. When something happens, we can fix it right away. Or if we don't fix it right away, it is nobody else's fault but our own. And then some, just like sport culture, education, and language. Is there a specific education session with coaches and athletes on inclusion?
Should have parents on that.
Parents?
Yeah.
Yeah?
That's true.
That's the deal, I mean, depending on the age group that you're working with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Parents should be included, like, when you have a parent meeting.
Yeah.
That should be part of your discussion.
I said we are an inclusive.
Yeah.
And the education sessions would probably be different. You know, if I was giving this talk to a group of athletes, it would be a little bit different than as a group of coaches. Parents would be different too. So, you know, topics wouldn't necessarily all be the exact same. Is gender neutral language used in policies and information? So that's just in policies, do things say they, them, theirs versus the standard he, him, his that most older policies are written in? Are we using inclusive language when we're acting with our athletes or trying to as best we can? Failing 50% of the time at least means we're succeeding 50% of the time. Do those in positions of authority actively discourage and reprimand homophobic, transphobic language actions? And are there any sports-specific hurdles that you need to overcome? Because each sport has obviously its own things. Does anybody have any questions?
Do you guys have any questions for Nick?
It can be about anything. I have to try to answer as best I can.
No questions? We have one person. Oh, no, they stopped typing. So I don't think you have any questions online either. And I will share with you guys, so we captured this recording, so we can share the recording too if you want to just rehear. Like, it's one thing to share the slides, but if you want to rehear Nick, we have this captured as well.
And I do, so in the slides, I skipped over
A couple of the
videos. There's some good ones. There's some that are just whatever, but some of them are pretty good, especially the ones, there's two on trans inclusion, and it's people in the trans community talking about their experiences in the trans community, which I can't speak to. So we didn't have time to go over those videos, but those are ones that, particularly if that's a point of interest for you, that might be a good
one to watch.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Nick. Thanks for joining us. And, if any of you guys, thank you very much.